Michael Soothing here. As I told you in my previous video, I recently took a trip to Las Vegas for a week, the primary intention of which was to be wedded in holy matrimony to my beautiful bride, Joanne, who has her own ASMR channel, as you probably know. But while we were there, also, in addition to walking 20,000 steps on one of the days in the blistering heat, we did some fun things. We checked some places out, and one of the things that we did was to visit the Titanic exhibit there, which was really kind of fascinating. It's at the big Pyramid Casino, which someone reminded me is called the Luxor, that has the giant beam of light going off into the sky at night, and that goes out into space. And they probably see that light beam as far away as Mars. I'm not sure. But anyway, maybe I should calculate that sometime. How far does that go? Could you see it if you were on the moon, I wonder? What about during the lunar eclipse? Okay, we're already off topic. But while we were at, first I'm going to describe to you what I can recall about the Titanic exhibit. I bought a little memento there, which is really, here's the bag that it comes in. No, I didn't bring the Titanic home with me. It would be really heavy, and it's still on the bottom of the Atlantic, by the way. But in the exhibit, they actually hauled up a 2,000 ton, was it 2,000? I think it was about a 2,000 ton piece. So they've got a big piece of the actual Titanic, complete with portholes and damage. A busted out porthole in one case that's still half there, the really thick glass that's waterproof and pervious. What's really fascinating, but anyway, as you know, my lovely new wife is Filipina, and they have a tradition in the Philippines, which is when you go travel somewhere, you buy some kind of little gift or gifts to bring back to the people you left behind. It's called pasalubong in Filipino language. And so my daughter Chelsea is fascinated with the Titanic, and we've seen the movie, a few times and stuff like that. She's read a lot about it on the internet and researched it. So I thought the pasalubong for Chelsea would be this interesting reproduction newspaper that they did, which we got a copy of at the exhibit, that had the headlines in the New York American on April 16th, 1912. So I got that for her. They reproduced it with the original graphics and everything, which of course are not so good, trying to show what happened. And of course the graphic is not accurate, as we know now. The ship didn't collide into the iceberg head on like that. The iceberg was hitting the side of the ship underneath the waterline, where the iceberg balloons out really large where you can't see it. It was whacking along the steel plates. The iron was weak because of the type they used was very high in sulfur compound, which is one of the reasons it was able to be split so easily by the big sharp protrusion of the iceberg. Anyway, but I digress. So I brought for Chelsea this paper, and we'll read just a little bit of it, and then I haven't looked at it yet, so I don't know what articles are in it. This is my first time looking at it. Here's a partial list of the saved people that survived. When you go to the exhibit, one of the interesting things that they do is they give you a replica of a boarding pass for the Titanic. I gotta find where I put that. I have those someplace. And lovely new bride, could you hand me that yellow bag? I might have put it in this yellow bag. Oops. Now I'm dropping things. I have my own disaster here. Oh, there's lovely new bride. Anyway, let me see if I have it in this bag. Nope. Well, I'm going to have to find it. Anyway, they give you a replica of the boarding pass. And on that boarding pass on the back, there's a name and a bio of one of the passengers, let's say from the second class level, right? And after you go through the whole exhibit, you get to this big wall that shows all the passenger manifest names. And it shows which ones survived and which ones were lost at sea by drowning or by freezing in the water. Most of the ones who died froze, not drowned, in that freezing cold water, which was actually below freezing, but because it's salt water, it wasn't frozen when they were there. In any case, my guy that I had, the name I had, let me go see if I can find that. I'll be right back. Hold on. All right. Thankfully, Joanne came to my rescue and found the boarding passes. So here's a replica of what the boarding pass looked like. Just like that. So we each got one of those to go through the exhibit. Then on the back, they give you a name and a bio of the person, one of the travelers, right? And it tells you what, like this one is a second class passenger. The name was Mr. William Harbeck from Paris, France, age 44, see there. And traveling to the Hotel Cadillac in New York. He was returning from Paris, where he had studied with a master filmmaker, it says. That was his reason for travel. He was hired by the White Star Line to film Titanic's maiden voyage. His next project in North America was a film of Alaska and the Yukon Territory. William traveled with Henrietta Roy, a young model he had met in Paris. Sounds scandalous, doesn't it? Because they weren't married, and back then that was kind of a scandal. Fascinated by Miss I don't know how to pronounce this, Yrois. It's like an Indian name, right? Or is that French? William followed her everywhere during the voyage. Sounds like a bit of a stalker, huh? Even watching her as she played solitaire. I think maybe that's not the very best way to strike up a new relationship, but apparently they were traveling companions. I think he might have been a little bit jealous and possessive. Didn't want her paying attention to any other guys. Myself, I've never known anyone who was jealous or possessive. So, oh wait, maybe one person. So I don't know what that's like, but anyway, at the end of our tour, I looked him up on the board, and it turns out that both he and the lovely model, Miss Wara, both perished on the voyage, and so that was sad. Now, Joanne had a different person. She had, this is her boarding pass, and she had somebody named Mrs. Stephen Hold, Annie Margaret Hill from Cornwall, England. See? Let's see how old she was. 36. Traveling with her husband, Stephen Hold. And they were traveling, their ultimate destination was Sacramento, California. It would have been lucky not to make it since it's such a nasty place to live. Oh, I lived there last summer, remember? It was so hot. Annie and her husband had hurried to England in November 1911 because of an illness in the family. After several months of visiting, the couple was returning to California. The Holds were transferred from a different voyage they had booked onto the Titanic because of a coal strike. That was the case with several of the passengers. They had booked passage on a less expensive ship, but because there was a big coal strike in England, only the Titanic was provisioned, and so they got moved to that, and they all thought they were really lucky, usually. Wow, we get to go on the maiden voyage of the unsinkable, largest ship ever built at the time, most luxurious, the Titanic. But as it turns out, Mrs. Stephen Hold did survive when we looked her up on the wall of the passenger manifest at the end. So she made it. Her husband, however, did not, because I looked him up too. Most of the men died because they would only let women and children on the lifeboats, even when the lifeboat was only half full. It was like, oh no, women and children only, because you know how the Brits are sometimes. No offense to you British, I'm talking about the Brits in 1911, okay? So you subbies in UK, don't be offended, because you feel the same way about those old White Star Line employees, I know. Anyway, some of the lifeboats were launched 1/3 or 1/2 full with just women and children. The men were expected to wait for what I don't know, for the ship to go down so they could freeze to death or drown, is what happened to most of them. So that was a sad thing. Anyway, as we progressed through
That looks interesting too.
there was another one we found when we were outside the exhibit that someone had laid down. One more, so you get a bonus boarding pass story. This one was a Mr. Ernst Gilbert Danham from Stanton, Iowa, 34 years old, traveling with his wife, son, and friends. Ernst and his wife, Anna, were returning home after a year-long honeymoon in Sweden. That's where my spouse lived for a good long time. Where their first son was born, they planned to settle on Ernst's fruit farm in California. While in Sweden, Ernst worked as an immigrant recruiter for the White Star Line, receiving a commission for every Swede that he signed up to travel on Titanic. He was successful, and he boarded the Titanic with over $300 in cash and gold, which was a small fortune to a third-class passenger. He was third class. Because we found this outside, we didn't have a chance to look at it on the big wall manifest, but I'm certain that if he was a male and in third class, he perished on the voyage, because almost all men in third class did not make it. Some of the guys in first and second class did, especially first class. They were very class conscious at this time in history in the UK. So, if you saw the movie Titanic, where they were holding back behind a gated wall, all the third class passengers. That's kind of the way it was. So anyway, before I do a little more reading and see what's in this paper, I'll try to remember what was in the exhibit. There were something like 1,200 artifacts altogether, and they were all artifacts that they brought up from the ocean floor during their expeditions. The giant piece that was part of the side of Titanic, they had a failed expedition in something like 2011 or something like that. And it broke the crane, on the ship and all that kind of thing, because it was so heavy. And there were rough seas. They had to go back 2 years later and try again to pull that piece up, which they did do successfully finally. It's covered in a thin, transparent layer of fine wax so that it won't continue to corrode and degrade, which it would do if you exposed it to the air after all that time under saltwater ocean. Anyway, we saw lots of artifacts, things people brought on board that they left behind. Some of it looks pristine, like it was never touched. If it was, say, China or something like that, that the ocean doesn't deteriorate the acidic, salts and metals in the ocean. But of course other things that were metal would be all corroded and stuff. So there were lots of personal items. There was plates and forks and things from the Titanic itself. All of the bowls and things were lined up neatly, the way they found them. On the ocean floor, they found some stuff that was in perfect condition, because it would have fallen out after the ship split. Some stuff would have come out. The debris field was something like a mile long on the ocean floor. So they had interesting stories about the passengers as you go through the exhibit. They have the floor set up so that it's moving slightly. At first you think it's your imagination, and then you start feeling queasy, and you realize that they're giving you the sensation of being on deck, that the floor is kind of moving as you're going through the thing. And so it's a relief when you get back out onto solid ground in a way. What other things did they have in there? They had a little miniature iceberg that they keep at the same temperature as the iceberg that the Titanic collided with. So you could reach out and touch it and see how cold that ice was. And they had, items from the ship itself, big hawsers and stuff that they would tie lines to, and all kinds of. And then they did some recreation stuff based on the blueprints and the photographs from Titanic. Like, remember in the movie where you had the big grand staircase, right? And at the end of the film, when the old lady dies and goes in to be with her lover, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, the heartthrob of women everywhere. What was the Rose, played by, what's that Australian actress's name? Help me out. House Ghost, who is now my marital companion. What's her name? Kate? I can't remember. Anyway, remember they met on the grand staircase and then reunited there. They recreated that in the exhibit with great detail, so that was kind of a cool effect, and a few things like that. Is the exhibit worth going to? Well, that depends on your perspective. It's certainly interesting. I'm not sure that it's interesting $40 worth, which is the price of admission. I would say it's interesting about $20 worth. Of course, you can get $5 off virtually anywhere with all the coupon hawkers in Vegas who are constantly accosting us, trying to give us free shows and dinners in exchange for forcing us to sit through a boring timeshare condo presentation. To which I said, I'm just simply not interested. But, you know, that's a different story. So, anyway, it was interesting. Here it says, let's read at least the headline. J.J. Astor lost on Titanic. That was a rich guy from the time. Must have been a New Yorker. 1,200 to 1,500 dead. I believe this was the first paper that came out, so a lot of the information wouldn't have been accurate yet. No cell phones back then. Dispatch direct to the New York American Bureau. If you know the story of Titanic, it's kind of sad that there were many things that contributed to the disaster that have to do with the arrogance of the human mind. For example, the White Star Line wanted to make this maiden voyage be a speed record, so they put a lot of pressure on the captain and the crew to not slow down, even when they got into the dangerous ice fields with the giant bergs that they had been warned about, that previous ships had just traveled through there and were sending Morse code warnings to them saying, giant bergs. Well, we've even stopped for the night so that we can see in the morning. It was a moonless night, so you couldn't see these bergs, right? Like that would be one thing that contributed. Another was when Carpathia and others in the California tried to warn Titanic, the telegraph operator wired telegraph back and said, stop bothering us. We're sending rich people telegrams right now back home, okay? You know, to friends and family. Okay, they didn't say rich people telegrams, but that's what they were doing, right? The third class passengers weren't sending telegrams. It was the rich folks who said, oh, I have to tell them. It's kind of like their version of people today who insist on every time they go poo, they put it on Twitter, right? Because they think you all need to know, right? So that's how it was. The rich folks, their Twitter of the time was to send a telegram back home. Here I am enjoying a life of luxury. I had duck l'orange for dinner, and that's more important than us getting an iceberg warning that's going to kill us all, okay? So you see how people are back then and today. I think we're even more self-indulgent and self-centered today than people were even then. Just my opinion, but when I watch people walk around with their cell phones running into each other and running into posts and things, falling off curbs and stuff. Do you ever go to a restaurant and you see this couple, right? They're having their weekly night out for a date, and the whole time they're both looking at their cell phone. They don't say a word to each other the whole dinner, right? Don't you think that's a little sad? Anyway, I'm way off topic, but I'm a newlywed, so I have to at least pretend to be very interested in. No, I really am interested in what the spouse has to say. Not going to sit there on my cell phone all through dinner, you know. I want to share with my partner. But people today are just thinking about their own little world. Anyway, that was another thing, was the way they were refusing to even receive the warnings. And just another example, in the chaos to leave port and make that speed record, they did not pick up the binoculars they needed for the lookouts on the bridge that were supposed to watch for icebergs. So they didn't have the proper equipment. I can't remember now in the film whether the guys had binoculars or not, but in the real world they did not, because they were forgotten back in UK. So when the guys were supposed to keep a lookout on a moonless night for icebergs, they couldn't see them till they got really close. Otherwise they could have avoided that collision. That's just a human mix-up, isn't it? And there were many contributing factors like that. The kind of rivets that were used to weld the plates to the side of the ship, the cheap steel iron that was used with too high a sulfur content, on and on you can go down the list. Anyway, let's see what the paper says about it. Wow, we're already almost a half hour in. Are you asleep yet? Because if you're not, you will be by the time I get done. Dispatch direct to the New York American Bureau at the Wanamaker stores. But okay, I'm not going to read all that. The steamer Olympic reports that the steamer Carpathia reached the Titanic's position at daybreak today, but found boats and wreckage only, lifeboats. She reported Titanic had foundered at 2:20 a.m. The message adds that the Titanic boats are all accounted for, that would be the lifeboats, and that about 675 souls were saved, crew and passengers, the latter nearly all women and children. Almost all the men died. There were about 2,200 persons in all on board the Titanic. Between 1,200 and 1,500 persons, passengers and crew perished when the unsinkable Titanic, the $10 million White Star liner, went to the bottom of the sea. So reports the steamers, which in answer to the Titanic's wireless shrieks for help, rushed to her aid. Let's see what else this paper says. Great names filled the passenger list. Liner sinks 4 hours after striking the iceberg. This looks really interesting. It's just the big full-size pages they would originally had. And here's the names of all the famous people of the day that were on it. They have in here a longitudinal cutaway that shows the Titanic decks and how it was set up. Of course, at the time this paper was written, they had no idea how the disaster had actually unfolded. Everyone thought that the whole ship went down in one piece. That's how they imagined it. They weren't really listening to the passengers who saw it split in two and one piece sunk and then the other. It's like they ignored that or something, because everyone had in their mind this idea of the whole thing going up and then sliding under the water. So, but of course now we know how it unfolded. I won't read you the names because we won't recognize any of them, of the famous people on board, but there were many. What else is interesting here? They show Jack Wynn says the highest praise is due to the Titanic's master. Well, I don't know about that. That's an article. Women and children first rule in the rescue. Here it shows the captain. I think women and children first was a very good policy. But the problem is they didn't put as many people on the lifeboats as they could have. So if women and children are not available for that lifeboat to fill it, why wouldn't you put some more people on it? So that was part of the rigid thinking of the Brits who were in charge of the lifeboats at the time.
Wait,
Yes.
can you smell it? Can you smell it?
Yeah,
Fishy.
it smells a little fishy, the paper. Maybe that's for authenticity. I don't know.
I use fish.
Yeah, I think so. Let's see. It says here, the Titanic, the ill-fated boat was about 1,200 miles east of Sandy Hook, 900 miles southeast of Halifax, Nova Scotia. Carpathia, White Star admits to the horrible loss. There's a whole bunch of articles in here. I'm not going to try to read them all to you. Oh, and we have ads. Imaginary ads. Some men's suits for $25. And those would be high-end New York suits, not some cheap off-the-rack department store suit. That shows you how much inflation has gone up since then. Let's see here. 10 liners at Hook Cripple Wireless. Bombardment of messages from fog-bound fleet render the service useless. Titanic was insured for $5 million, it says back here on this other article. Effort to make law for more lifeboats futile. Apparently someone had tried to pass a law to have enough lifeboats on board for all the passengers, which, by the way, now is the law in today's world, and the Titanic disaster is part of the reason for that. People of note included in Titanic's list. I don't want to read the people of note. And housed ghost spouse, lovely bride of mine, could you be so kind as to hand me the second page of the paper? Oh, thank you so much. Let's see what else is in here. The Astors were on their way back from their honeymoon. Drowned millionaire's son rushed here when he learned of the disaster. I guess the millionaire had just married and was on his way back from a honeymoon when he died because he was a guy. And so that's a little bit sad. But at least I think he had a long honeymoon. So at least he got to enjoy life a little bit. But wouldn't it be sad for his surviving spouse to have just been married and then, have this happen? Some people take advantage. You guys know, some of you know, I did a series long ago in another life on Jodi Arias. Do you know I was watching the coverage, reading the articles about these big hurricanes, and the one that just hit Florida, some guy took advantage of the hurricane to bump off his wife and try to make it look like she was a victim of the hurricane. Ex-wife, I should say. Thank you for that correction. And I think he was having to pay alimony, and she had a new boyfriend, and he was bitter and angry. So as that story unfolds, I believe I will come back and do a video about it. But instead of my acerbic, loud and aggressive Jodi Arias video style, I will do an ASMR on it, or maybe I'll do one on my old channel and bring out my old aggressive self from when I was employed in aerospace as a manager. I had a different personality then. Anyway, life-saving provisions were inadequate, it says. Finance, literature, and society represented on the maiden voyage of the lost ship. When we went through the exhibit, they showed how on Titanic, even the third-class passengers, which is called steerage, had more luxurious accommodation than what was normal at the time on other ships. They had better food, and they had actual mattresses, 4 bunks to a cabin, and you might have stranger in there, but you had a real mattress and pillow and things, and so many didn't have to share a bathroom as on some other ships where they put straw on the bunks, just a hard bunk with straw and more people. So in second class it was way more luxurious than what people were used to on other ships. They had really good cuisine because they cooked the meals for first and second class in the same galley, so there wasn't too much difference, and they had a library and a smoking room and all that kind of thing that was unusual for second class. And of course the first class was very opulent. I forget all what they had. You can go watch the movie for that, since they did a pretty good job of recreating the actual Titanic in the film as well. The director worked very hard to try to reproduce it as accurately as possible. Lack of lifeboats believed to be the cause of heavy loss on the Great White Star liner. Well, it would be that, and the fact that they wouldn't fill the boats that they did have as well. So Ben describes the wireless keyman. First duty is to reach all ships possible and then report to his captain. So there's a lot of different stories in here. Many lost ships met the Titanic's fate is another article about how many ships of that day had impacted icebergs and were lost at sea in a similar fashion. But the reason the Titanic became such a big story compared to the others is that it was the largest and most luxurious ship built at the time, and was also billed as being unsinkable. And it had a lot of famous people on board, and it was the maiden voyage, etc., etc. So that's why so many people became fascinated with it over the years. And I believe there have been at least 5 films made about Titanic, at least. Even the pulp fiction writer Clive Cussler, who writes all those fictional sea-related stories, wrote a book called Raise the Titanic, which was turned into a movie back in the early 70s or something, before they realized that the Titanic was in multiple pieces, not in one piece on the ocean floor. So anyway, that film is pretty out of date now, but there were several other films made in earlier times, black and white films. I remember seeing one when I was a kid. It was called A Night to Remember, and it was pretty realistic and scary for its day. It was inaccurate as portraying how the ship went down in one piece, but it was pretty accurate otherwise in many other ways. So that might be an interesting film to check out sometime if you want to see an old black and white of the descent. They even had silent film made about it shortly after it occurred. And there's a couple other films, and of course, many, many documentaries. So we have remained fascinated with the Titanic ever since 1912. Here we are 105 years later, so that's just one little facet of our trip to Vegas that I thought might be interesting for you to drift off to sleep to. In the future, of course, I will do stories about married life. Maybe I'll do a role play as a marriage counselor or something, along those lines. But we can talk about various good and bad things in relationships and how to make them work. Until then, and I'll give you my impressions of Vegas also in a future video. Let's just say it's a very interesting place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there for even a month, let alone, an extended period. But, if you like a lot of bells and whistles and lights and attractions and noise and partying, well, Vegas is the place for you. But you gotta also enjoy breathing second-hand smoke and lots of it. We had a giant lightning storm there too, which was kind of fun and interesting. I'll tell you about that some other time. Until then, don't ASMR and drive, and stay tuned. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, or even if you don't. And you can visit my my wife channel, Scorpio NYT, for ASMR mukbang videos and things like that. And she has, by the way, one of the most lovely, soft-spoken voices I've ever heard in my life. I'm trying to convince her to do more soft-spoken videos. I think I'm making a little dent, because she does one now and then just to make me happy, or to shut me up. I'm not sure which, but anyway, no, she does it to make me happy. And some of her subbies too, because they're always requesting. The thing about ASMR is that you simply cannot please all of the people all the time. If you talk too low, you'll get complaints. If you talk too loud, you'll get complaints. If you make crinkling noises, some people with this paper right here, or this bag, right? Some people will say, I love that crinkling sound. It's so relaxing. And others will say, will you stop doing that annoying crinkling on my video, So I don't have too much trouble with these complaints on my channel, but Joanne gets a lot of that on hers because everybody wants something different. And what some people love in ASMR, others don't like, and vice versa. So I still have a long, long list of requests. I will still continue to make videos, and probably more of them as winter approaches. I'm still very, very busy with several house issues and legal issues and things at the moment, which I will resolve over time and then have more time. So we moved to a different house in a different town on the coast because I'm having a problem in my current home by the water with some land issues issues, land settling issues, and that might take a year or two to resolve, and I hope to move back to this spot, but I'm going to hold on to it in the meantime as a place to visit and enjoy while that's getting worked out. So I'm going to juggle a couple of places for a while, but that's okay, because I love the nature here. I'm at my house by the water at the moment, and anyway, I'm rambling now, but I know that puts you to sleep, so until next time, don't ASMR